On some characteristic differences among the ancient poets, August 7th, 1788. In our time, the poet no longer has such an expansive sphere of influence. The famous deeds of our ancient, and even of our more recent Germans, are neither interwoven with our constitution nor preserved in memory through oral tradition. We learn of them only from history books, often of foreign nations, and even this knowledge is limited to the more educated classes. The tales that entertain the common folk are fantastic legends, which are neither connected to our religious system nor to actual history. Moreover, the ideas and culture of the social classes are now so disparate that a poet of our time could hardly hope to be universally understood or widely read. Thus, our great German epic poet's wise choice of subject matter has not brought him into so many hands as would have occurred if our public institutions were Greek in character. One part of the audience has already distanced itself from the system on which the whole poem and its individual parts are based. Another is too consumed by the concerns of increasingly numerous comforts and needs of life to find time or inclination to elevate itself and approach the ideas of the higher classes. What interests us now is the poet's art, not the subject itself, which often leaves an opposite impression. A particularly striking quality of the works of the ancients is what we call simplicity, which is more felt than precisely defined. It essentially consists in the fact that the writers portray the image of the thing faithfully without seeking to make it more engaging through subtle details, learned allusions, or a slight departure from truth in order to render it more brilliant or attractive, as is commonly demanded today. Every emotion, even a complex one, they express simply, without distinguishing its manifold components as the understanding might, and without dissecting what is obscure. Moreover, the entire system of their education and cultivation was such that each person acquired their ideas through direct experience, and they did not know the cold book learning that impresses only dead symbols upon the brain. With everything they knew, they could still say, how, where, why? They had learned it. Thus, each necessarily had a unique mental form and a system of thoughts of their own. They had to be original. We, on the other hand, are taught from youth onward a ready-made vocabulary and set of signs for ideas, and they rest in our minds without activity or use. Only gradually, through experience, do we come to know our store of knowledge and to associate actual meaning to the words that, for us, already function like molds, shaping our ideas, with predetermined scope and limitation, and relations through which we are accustomed to see everything. Here lies, incidentally, a chief advantage of learning foreign languages. We come to learn how to group or separate concepts more freely. From this modern mode of education, it follows that, in some people, the sequences of accumulated ideas and learned words run parallel to one another without ever forming a unified system, often without even touching or intersecting. Another characteristic feature of the ancients is that their poets especially depicted the outward sensory phenomena of visible nature with which they were intimately familiar, whereas we today are more informed about the inner mechanisms of forces, and in general know more about the causes of things than about how they appear. Among the ancients, everyone became familiar with the occupations of other classes through everyday life without intentionally setting out to study them. Therefore, technical terms had not become common. Although we too have words to describe fine nuances in the changes of visible nature, they have become part of vulgar language or regional dialects. In general, one sees immediately in the works of the ancients that they surrendered themselves calmly to the flow of their thoughts, creating their works without regard for an audience, whereas in modern works, it is evident that the author composed them with the consciousness that they would be read and almost with the idea that they were conversing with their readers. We also see that in the still prevailing forms of poetry, circumstances determine the direction of the genius of the original inventors. Nowhere is this influence so clearly seen as in the history of dramatic poetry. Tragedy originated in crude festivities held in honor of Bacchus, accompanied by singing and dancing. See Tibullus 2:157, Horace Ars Poetics, verse 220, and Wieland's note on there. From the reward given at these events, it took its name. At first, only one performer interrupted these festivities by recounting ancient divine myths. Aeschylus was the first to introduce 2 actors, to build a proper stage, where previously a hut made of branches, skene, had sufficed, partitioned into multiple chambers to allow different scenes. The audience had to move from one to the other. This was avoided with the construction of a proper stage, and subsequent poets maintained the unity of place, a rule they only rarely sacrificed to achieve greater poetic beauty, for example, Sophocles in Ajax, verse 815 following. From its first true inventor, the language of tragedy also acquired that solemn dignity which has distinguished it ever since. It is evident from this how the unique form of Greek tragedy, especially the special function of the chorus, developed. Had the Germans refined themselves gradually without foreign influence, their spirit would certainly have taken a different course and produced native German drama instead of borrowing the form from the Greeks. Comedy had a similar origin, in the rustic farces, phallic plays of country folk, and in the Fescennine verses of the Romans. See Aristotle, Poetics, chapter 2, section 4, Horace, Epistles 2:1, verse 139 following, and Wieland's note thereon. Nature itself taught even the most uncultured people a kind of primitive poetry, out of which art gradually developed what refined nations now call poetry. Among the Athenians, of whom Juvenal said, natio commodia est, this genre naturally flourished, whereas the serious Romans were less inclined to appreciate subtle comedy. Only these two genres of dramatic poetry were known to the ancients. Some hybrid forms invented to accommodate the overly adorned tastes of certain audiences, ket epikarion poiantes du theaters, Aristotle Poetics, chapter 7, section 13, seem to not have endured for long.
Notes. 1. Greek educational context. Late 18th century German gymnasiums taught students to value originality by combining direct observation of life with study of classical texts. Ancient poets learned through immersion in civic rituals, oral tradition, and daily social experience rather than reliance on rote memorization of abstract vocabulary. 2. Simplicity in archaic poetry. Greek and Roman poets such as Homer and Virgil prioritized faithful representation of events and emotions over elaborate rhetorical ornamentation. Modern critics contrast this with neoclassical and romantic tendencies to amplify or embellish with learned allusions. 3. How? Where? Why? This line alludes to Epicurean and Stoic emphases on understanding causes and natural phenomena through direct inquiry. Classical authors often invoked questions of causality in their expository passages, for example, Lucretius, De Rerum Natura. 4. Preformed vocabulary. In 18th century pedagogy, students often memorized word lists and grammatical paradigms, example Latin golden ass style manuals, before grasping their semantic depth. Hegel criticizes this method for stifling intellectual initiative. 5. Value of foreign languages. Learning Greek, Latin, or modern European tongues, such as French or English, helped students recognize that translation requires grouping and parsing concepts differently rather than importing a fixed mental ledger of ready-made terms. 6. Technical terminology. Ancient poets knew crafts and social roles, farmers, blacksmiths, sailors, by lived experience. They used everyday language rather than specialized technical jargon, which modern specialists may obscure by disciplinary terminology. 7. Audience awareness. Classical authors composed primarily for performance or patronal favor, but did not write with a mass audience in mind. Modern poets, in contrast, often tailor style and content expressly to appeal to critics and literate readers. 8. Origin of Greek tragedy. Early Athenian festivals to Dionysus, the city Dionysia, featured dithyrambic choral performances. The shift from choral myth recitation to dramatized dialogue occurred when Thespis introduced an actor, Hippocrates, opposite the chorus, see 6th century BC. Aeschylus later added a second actor, creating conflict-driven dialogue. 9. Bacchic festivities and the term tragedy. The Greek word tragodia, goat song, likely refers to prizes, goatskins, awarded to choral choruses at Dionysian festivals. Horace and Tibullus allude to these ritual origins. 10. Aeschylus, c. 525 to 456 BC, Considered the father of tragedy, he formalized dialogue between actors and chorus and constructed the early stage, skene, that evolved into classical theater architecture. Before his innovation, performances used temporary branch-built booths to signify scene changes. 11. Unity of place. Classical dramatists adhered to Aristotle's precept in Poetics 6-14 that tragedy should observe unities of action, time, and place. Sophocles' Ajax, beginning around line 815, is noted for largely maintaining a single setting, with minimal departures for dramatic effect. 12. Chorus function. In Greek tragedy, the chorus provided narrative commentary, moral reflection, and emotional resonance, distinguishing the form from later dramatic conventions. 13. German drama and Greek influence. During the 18th century, German playwrights, for example Lessing's Hamburg Dramaturgy, consciously modeled tragedies and comedies on classical precedents. Native folk drama traditions existed, but institutionalization of the stage followed Hellenistic templates. 14. Roman fescennine verses. Early Roman comedic forms, such as fescennina carmina, comprised ribald, improvisational dialogue performed at rural celebrations, often preceding Plautus' adaptation of Greek New Comedy. Aristotle in Poetics 2:4 and Horace in Epistles 2.139 ff discuss these rustic origins. 15. Juvenal, circa late 1st or early 2nd century AD. In his satires, Satire 3.147, he quips, "Natio commodia ist," the people are born to be comic actors, reflecting Athenian dominance in comedic performance, contrasted with Roman gravitas that prized serious genres over subtle satire. 16. Hybrid dramatic forms. Some Hellenistic adaptations, example satyr plays, Menippean satire, merged elements of tragedy and comedy to suit specific audiences. Aristotle's Poetics 7.13 terms these kata epikureion, occasional compositions, whose reliance on topical ornamentation often limited their longevity.